start. This is Conservation Cafe, reducing building emissions, fighting one of the top sources of greenhouse gases. In our region, transportation and buildings are the two top sources of greenhouse gases. In DC, buildings are by far the number one. And so it's really, really important that we figure out how to bring those down. But how do you do that in a place like DC where, the buildings are built and many of them are being retrofitted and being changed, but there's an awful lot of buildings that are in, basically the same shape they were in 80, 90, even 100 years ago. It's a huge challenge. And so bringing the Green Bank in, bringing Eli in, and Gary, who I think will join us as well a little bit, is to hear about their work is a really exciting opportunity. They're very new. I'll give a little more of an introduction about them. Well, I'll go ahead and do my introduction now. They're very new. The Green Bank is just ending its first year of full operations. Is that right? You'll correct me later.
First full fiscal year, yes.
First full fiscal year, that's right. And it was created by DC Council several years ago. And what happened starting in 2019 was there was a board of directors, and they were creating what would become the Green Bank. And we ANS had the opportunity to interact with the board of directors, including its chair, Brandy Collender, who we've also had as a speaker at Taking Nature Black, and has been a really wonderful leader in the DC environmental community with federal experience as well. And the DC Climate Coalition invited Brandy to get together with a meeting to talk about what's this Green Bank? What can it do? It's so important to deal with emissions in buildings. We talked about the importance of making sure that the new staff they would hire, the new CEO, Eli, would be equity focused, would really take a lens of making sure that these investments benefited not only new developers and redevelopers and the people in gentrifying parts of the city where there was new money coming in, but also that they found a way to bring down heating bills and electricity bills for those, with the least to spend on those services, those utilities, while also getting climate change benefits. So we talked about all sorts of things, and we were really, really thrilled when Eli came on and started staffing up the rest of the Green Bank and started making investments. And so there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to do. As we think about this, it's important to recognize that it's pretty new. Montgomery County also has a Green Bank. Virginia, I think, has just passed or was trying to pass enabling legislation to allow the formation of green banks, but my understanding is they don't yet have one, especially not in our area. So there's a lot of opportunity here. But basically, the idea is get money, get it into people's hands to fix up their buildings, and then they get savings on their bills, which they can use to over time pay those back. And there's so many different financial mechanisms that Eli will talk about. And so we're really honored that we have Eli here. He's the CEO of the Green Bank. He came in. I'm going to let him discuss his professional background, but I'm going to thank him again for working with us, listening with us, really being so open to public input throughout your time on the Green Bank. And thanks for joining us tonight. So it turns out he's also an energy nerd, everyone. So while he's going to answer some questions about sort of finance and policy and structure with his Green Bank hat on, he also says he has some ideas for your home energy needs. Deborah, just so you know.
Getting myself into trouble right off the bat. That's good.
Before I turn it over to Eli to start your presentation, I'm just going to finish up my general introduction, which is about the Audubon Naturalist Society. Our mission is to inspire residents of the greater DC region to appreciate, understand, and protect their natural environment through outdoor experiences, education, and advocacy. And our vision is to create a larger and more diverse community of people who treasure the natural world and work to preserve it.
Great. Thank you, Eliza. And thanks everyone for joining tonight. I'm really excited to be out and about, so to speak, virtually and chatting with you all. I think as Eliza mentioned, I'm just back from parental leave last week. So I'm still jumping back in after a couple of months of focusing mostly on baby time, but really excited to be back. And it's a good time to be back. There's a lot of opportunities that we're seeing here at the Green Bank, and Gary and the team have really done a great job of keeping things moving along in my absence, which I'm grateful for as well. I also want to just start out and say thank you to you all for your support. I know that it took a lot of work to get the legislation passed initially and to get the support for the board to be named, for the funds to be transferred, for all of those pieces that happened, well before I started and some after I started. So I really appreciate your all's ongoing support. We've had lots of good discussions over my tenure with Ari, and looking forward to continuing to work with you all, and welcome on board. So really excited to have the opportunity to just have an open discussion, share a little bit about, background on us, what we've done over the past year and a half, and then do some discussion and brainstorming about sort of what comes next. So really looking forward to spending some time with you all. So if you can jump to the next slide, Gary. Thank you. This is just a little bit of background. You all are probably pretty familiar, but just for baseline setting, DC's goal, 50% emissions reductions by 2032. There are several pieces to how DC plans to meet that goal. I often think of the green bank as the sort of, well, there's a few percentage left over and we want to be able to make all of this more cost effective for businesses. So let's create a green bank. And a lot of hand waving happens, and then we all get there to our goals. We have a lot of flexible authority, which is great. The leadership that the council showed and that Mayor Bowser showed in moving that forward, comes from a deep-seated concern about the environment and inclusive prosperity. When I first met the mayor, when I was interviewing, she was very clear, this was a early priority for her that has taken longer than she wanted it to take. And so we needed to be sure and get money out the door as quickly as we could, we've taken that to heart and what we tried to do. Generally speaking, to be a little more precise, we try to fill financing and information gaps. So we look for projects that they may deploy new technology, they may be in areas that haven't been seen by commercial banks before, or the developer may be a new developer who hasn't done projects at that size before, or comes from underrepresented communities. So really looking for projects that from a technical perspective makes sense, from a commercial perspective makes sense, but may not have a 15 or 20-year track record of projects like that a commercial bank would really want to see in order to issue a loan at typical commercial rates. So in general, to kind of expound on that a little bit more, we use similar tools to commercial banks. Our main flexibility is that we don't need to return excessive profits to our shareholders, i.e. you all, the residents of DC. We do have a goal of being self-sustainable over time. We're not going to be there on day one. We're not going to be there at the end of the second year, but we want to be moving to that trajectory so that the fund that we manage eventually is going to be self-supporting. We're also looking to raise other funds to help support that. But as a mission-driven financial institution, we're not just looking at what's the financial return on these investments we're making, but what's the sustainability impact primarily. And I'll talk about our values, but primarily for us, that's looking at the climate impact. We're looking at how that impacts DC's inclusive prosperity. Are we helping to serve communities that have not been historically served by financial institutions? Are we investing in geographies in DC that have not been as invested in traditionally? Those are all factors that we look at when we're making our investments. And so we want to balance across our portfolio a financial return, our sustainability return, and our clean economy return in terms of job generation and inclusive prosperity. So the high level of vision, mission, and values, how we kind of try and think about that and encapsulate that in a short phrase that we can remember. Vision is a thriving, clean economy for all DC. And our mission is to provide access to capital, to grow the clean economy, to develop a more equitable, resilient, and sustainable DC. We really look at our core values as these three pillars: sustainability, primarily climate change, but also looking at other local environmental factors; clean economy, specifically looking at creating jobs in DC in the clean economy; and then inclusive prosperity. So making sure that we're serving all residents of DC equally, and then we're providing access to capital equally to all residents, regardless of geography, income, employment status, race, etc. So we've focused As I mentioned, our statute is very broad. And so we've tried to bring that focus down somewhat so that we can create some areas for the team to focus on, and so that folks know what to approach us on. We're still incredibly broad, frankly. That continues to be both an opportunity and a challenge for us. But our core business area to date has been solar power. Of our funding streams, one of the funds must go to projects that include, or programs that include, solar power. So we'll be doing solar, and if we're going to be doing renewable energy here in DC, solar is an obvious piece. So not a hard choice to make there. We do pre-development, construction. We support operations and maintenance. We've done community solar projects. And because we're based in DC and a DC governmental entity, we can be much more comfortable with risk around solar renewable energy certificates, so SRECs, than maybe a commercial bank might be. Stormwater resilience. So this is another SRC. It can be a little bit confusing, but the Department of Energy and Environment has created a market for stormwater retention, with the goal being to allow properties in the outer core of DC, the MS4, to make improvements that can retain additional stormwater, reduce the investments required across the city for that kind of treatment, and reduce the inflows into our waterways of polluted waters, and support that through stormwater retention credits that developers in other areas of the city are required to purchase. It's a relatively novel concept and market. There's a few other cities who are doing it. There's still a lot of, I'd say, growing pains in that market, but we're really excited to have supported our first stormwater retention credit project. And we have another one that is we're hoping to move fairly quickly, that would be a little bit larger. So thank you. I think she's okay, but we'll have to go check it a bit. On green buildings, as Eliza mentioned earlier, and really the focus for today, green buildings really represent the vast majority of climate emissions in DC. So 75% is the number that I've seen most recently, compared to transportation and other sources. And so we are lucky to be working in this space in DC that has also adopted the building energy performance standards. So there's a significant stick out there, starting at larger buildings over 50,000 square feet. And the simple version of that, the way it works is every 6 years, look at the performance of buildings across the city. There's a baseline set, and the average performance becomes the floor for the next 6-year cycle. So it's a gradual process of ratcheting up performance, thank you, across the city, which is really exciting and helpful for us, as we know through that process, DOEE has collected and published tons of data about where buildings are that are not meeting the standards. You can easily see where some of the biggest opportunities are from some of the biggest users. And so we really see this as a rich market opportunity from our perspective as an impact investor in the financing side, but also for engineers and architects who are looking to make these kind of upgrades. To date, our green buildings work has been pre-development finance. We did a listening tour when I first started, wanted to talk to folks about what was really missing, what was needed in the space. And from a number of different sectors and developers, what I heard was that there's a shortage of pre-development financing in DC, for one. And another is that for green buildings to really and truly be considered, it requires some investment up front. Ultimately, the costs are comparable, generally speaking, for even the highest level of truly efficient net zero buildings, or sometimes a slight increase. But that's only true if you're starting in the beginning with the design and really know what your parameters are, what you're trying to meet. If you come in at the permit stage after the pre-development work has all been done, the engineering's all been done, then it's very expensive to go back and retool those designs to redo all your permits to bring them to the highest standards of performance. So we really focused on that as an opportunity to have our dollars be leveraged significantly, because once the designs are set, once those those green building standards are put in the permit plans, they're much more likely to be built, and it's much more cost effective for them to be built. So most recently, we just announced a $1.8 million pre-development loan for Faircliff Plaza, which is affordable housing partnership there with Jonathan Rose Companies and Somerset Development. It's a DC company. We're really excited about that project. It is planning to be a passive house net zero project, affordable housing, which is another area of focus for us. And we're also implementing, and this is not the first time we've done this, but to our knowledge, we haven't seen this elsewhere from green banks. We have a sliding interest scale. So the greener the project actually is when it's built, the lower the interest rate. So we're really maintaining that incentive for the developer to meet their lofty goals that they put out there in the beginning, and we're providing the funds for them to be able to do that. So it's a great model, we believe, and we're excited to hopefully see it work and also potentially participate in investments down the road in that project and replicate the model across the city. And then clean transport, not what we're focusing on today, but wanted to make sure to mention it. There's a real opportunity on the climate perspective to shift to electric vehicles. We see this as really a long-term revenue generator, cost savings for the city, for fleet operators, for public transportation. At the same time, the local air quality benefits are dramatic. In DC today, many neighborhoods, the largest source of potentially harmful local air pollutants are coming from our transportation sector, particularly heavy duty vehicles, particularly bus fleets. And so the opportunity to reduce the long-term costs, reduce the climate emissions, and reduce local air pollution is really just a unique opportunity that we are very excited about and continue to try and push with our dollars. So a little bit of background on how we're structured. There's an 11-member board of directors, 7 voting member seats, although we have not had a full board. We still have one vacant seat, but those are appointed by the mayor, and then 4 non-voting ex officio members represented from the Office of CFO, 2 at this point representatives from the DMPED, and then our vice chair is representative from the Department of Energy and Environment. For the voting members, we have some restrictions and guidance in our statute about who the types of experience that we want to see on our board, to make sure that not only do we have financial institution experience, but we also have project development, affordable housing, climate experience. So the board's really got a breadth of backgrounds, which is by design and is helpful as we are trying to be a broad community serving institution. We also have several active committees necessary for any board to really function on a more granular level, so that we don't have to bring everything to full board. But we can jump to the next slide. So the meat and potatoes of what we do is financial products. As it's early stage, a lot of what we have done to date have been pilots and structured products, meaning that we're designing a particular loan to really fit the need of the developer or the business that we're working with. But our goal over the long term is that as we pilot those projects, as we borrow programs from other green banks and other institutions, that more of what we do on a day-to-day basis is going to be fairly straightforward, repeating something that we've done previously. So an example of that, CLEAR, is a commercial loan for energy efficiency and renewables. That's a program that we've adopted from Montgomery County Green Bank. We thought it'd be helpful for contractors to know they can access that from DC, they can access that from Montgomery County. Eventually, hopefully, if Virginia adopts, our Virginia neighbors adopt some green banks, that would be a potential place we'd have that product available across the region. The idea of Clear is that we work with a local commercial bank. We provide a loan loss reserve, and they, as a result, are more comfortable issuing a loan based on energy efficiency performance and renewable energy performance. So that's a product that we borrowed from another local bank, Green Bank. Solar development and construction loans, those are fairly straightforward. This is a picture of one of our projects at Fairfax Village. You can see the solar on the garages here, the exterior garages. You can't quite see, but there's solar on that flat roof at the top of the picture as well. And then on the right-hand side, there's also ground mount solar under the trees over there. There's actually more. Yeah, thanks. There's more over there now. Some of those bushes have been taken out with additional solar on that hillside for around too. But the solar construction process is, usually if it's on a building, which is most cases in DC, that's what you're seeing. You're not structurally building a new, complete from scratch, from ground up. You're really just mounting something on a roof. Modern solar installation, in most cases, can be done on a flat roof without penetrations. So it's really about putting a structure up there. Most complicated pieces are the wiring and interconnections, but it can be done fairly straightforward. Yes, this is the Fairfax Village round one that Flywheel Development did. So solar, another point that's just worth mentioning, you all are again probably aware, but solar credits in DC are extremely valuable relative to the rest of the country. So, the solar credit market, I haven't checked since I've been back, but DC solar credit prices typically are in the $350 to $450 range. If you go to Maryland, your solar credit is $35 typically. And that's a much more common number across PJM for a solar credit. So that's part of why, if you're a homeowner in the district, you probably had someone knocking on your door saying, I'd love to put solar up for free, because there's so much value associated with those credits. And we have a very limited market in which to make those installations. So the good news is that's a real opportunity for all of us who want to make sure that we see solar going in across the city. And you've seen in the past year, more investments going in Ward 7 and 8, finding that roof space. And one of our roles, I believe, is to make sure that that value is then also transferred to the local residents. And so one of the exciting things about the Flywheel project that I'll talk about again here, since we're looking at it, they fully committed to sharing 50% of their Solar for All value with the local residents. So their initial upfront payment that they received for these projects through Solar for All went to the local condo association, which then repaired roofs or did repaving or did landscaping or did structural repair. And so they've transferred millions of dollars to those condo associations through the first 2 years of projects that we've done. And now the majority of Fairfax Village condo associations actually have solar installations and are seeing those benefits. So I'm meandering a little bit here. Sorry about that, but it's a great project. So DC PACE, this was an existing program that is now being administered by us. We're continuing to work with the existing administrator, Urban Ingenuity. PACE is a long-term finance tool for financing energy upgrades, whether that's energy efficiency or renewable energy. It's done about 60 million of upgrades in DC. And we hope to really accelerate the pace of those investments. We view PACE and Clear as sort of working hand in hand together. PACE is not as well suited to properties with multiple owners like condo associations, but Clear is a good fit for some of those buildings. Navigator, I mentioned the pre-development loan that we just closed. Navigator is our product. We've adopted that and bringing it to DC with the help of Inclusive Prosperity Capital, which is a green bank that was spun out of the Connecticut Green Bank, but it's now an independent nonprofit. Navigator is ideal for small businesses and nonprofits that have up to 250,000 in pre-development that they're expecting for, an upgrade or a retrofit. That process is fairly streamlined, and rates are very low for those types of loans as a result. The mayor also announced today, this has been in the budget, so it's not been a secret, but the formal announcement for the Building Energy Performance Standards Accelerator was released today. We're really excited to be working with our colleagues at DOEE and the DCSU on the BEPS Accelerator. This is focused on the multifamily affordable housing buildings that are not meeting the BEPS standard in the current cycle, and they'll be eligible to receive a host of benefits to help them meet that standard for the next cycle, and ideally for multiple cycles going forward. So SEU will be doing energy assessments on those buildings that sign up. SEU's recommendations can then be used to come to us to seek to finance those upgrades and products. So really exciting opportunity. We're looking at, in our budget, 10.5 million roughly to finance some of those projects. It's not enough to fully fund the roughly 100 affordable housing multifamily buildings that do not yet meet the BEPS standards, but it should be a good start. And if we can demonstrate success with this project this year, we'll be looking to seek similar support going forward. And that's funded through federal ARPA dollars. And then coming soon, one piece that we wanted to flag for folks, several other green banks have worked with a credit union called the Clean Energy Credit Union, which is based in Colorado. They do financing for a wide variety of energy upgrades, and our neighboring green banks in Montgomery County has worked with them to do some solar finance. We are getting close to being able to announce something similar here in DC. Really, it's but what they're doing already is not going to change very much. So they're offering pretty competitive rates for those types of upgrades. Geothermal, electric vehicles, electric bicycles, and the rates are, again, they're fairly competitive. And once we're able to launch, we can help support that program locally. So we're really excited about supporting that. As a green bank, we don't, and most green banks are not your traditional regulated consumer bank. So we do not make consumer loans directly. So we wouldn't be lending to homeowners directly. We're focused more on the businesses, whether that's a developer who's doing solar installations, whether it's a building owner for multifamily. We're more at that commercial level, but we want to make sure that we're serving the businesses and the entities who are serving all of the residents. So we're excited to have this first product offering for residential solar coming soon. We have a couple of other pipeline projects that would be supporting, really they would be supporting larger scale finance for residential solar. Because the solar market in DC is so rich, there's been a lot of interest from developers, but they're still not always able to pass through the full benefits from the tax credits in particular to the homeowner, to the resident. So, we think we can help support some products that are going to be more favorable to the residents. So we're looking forward to working. We're working on those now, but I can't say much more about those until they're further down the line. Next slide. So when we look at what's the need of a project really across all of our sectors, there's the pre-development stage, which we talked about. Another area that can be challenging for especially new developers is construction. Construction as a bank, construction loans are not ideal because they're not very long-term. So you do a lot of work and then, the loan's repaid in a few months or hopefully a few months or a year. You're not seeing that long revenue stream from multiple years. The good news is, in our case, we can recycle those funds. We get to invest in a new project and see new projects getting built and developed. We've had some success with construction loans as a result that they're really just not as attractive unless you're paying significantly higher rates. So we're happy to support that level. And then at the permanent stage, obviously you want to see financing that's available for the long term. So I mentioned Clear and DC Pace. We also have some structured products, one of which is probably going to close in a couple of weeks, where we're partnering with a local community bank. They had some grant support. They were able to take the first 5 years of a permanent loan for a solar facility. We are comfortable taking the longer term, taking more of that solar credit risk that I was talking about earlier. We're getting paid for that as well. So we can see a higher rate. They can see the term and the risk that they're comfortable with. And together, when we combine that, then the developer's seeing a rate that they're comfortable with and they weren't able to match in other commercial institutions. So really trying to look at the life of the project from initial design stage through construction and permanent space, and make sure we're supporting the business process at each of those steps. So these are some of the examples of projects that we've done. I talked about a few of them, but you can see we're across the city, concentration to date in Ward 7 and Ward 8 in terms of the volume of projects, several of them at Fairfax Villages, which you saw a picture of, and that includes the solar projects that I've talked about, stormwater credit projects, the cemetery you can see down there is one of those, and Perry Street, and then pre-development for affordable housing at the Clifton Street project. Our total committed financing, right around 5 million. Obviously, we'd love to see that number be higher. We have a very large pipeline, which I think is the next slide. But finding the right types of projects that are both mission aligned, that are not already successfully commercially financed, but that are not so far down the risk level as to be untenable for us in our goal to eventually be self-sustainable. So there's a little bit of a sweet spot there that we're looking for, which could be hard to place. In terms of benefits from our investments, the highlight there is really, over 600 households coming through the Solar for All program. They are seeing half of their electricity now coming from solar, which is really exciting, at no cost to them. So that's really great. Something that we're all really proud of, helping to support that program. And then 100 plus jobs in the clean economy, primarily in construction, but also, of course, engineering, development, design. This is the pipeline slide I was talking about. These numbers, they change pretty regularly because we're actively working on our pipeline. Some of those things are going to fall off. The majority of them, frankly, fall off. But the large potential out there, some of those deals are going to come through, which fluctuated between 800 to 1.2 billion in terms of what's the overall potential need. How we fit into that could vary greatly, but our best guess, roughly $80 million of potential financing that we've identified and it's kind of in our active pipeline right now. So we're confident that there's plenty of demand, particularly when you look at what the investments are that are going to be needed across the city for the electric vehicle transition, for building electrification, to meet the BEPS standards. The volume of dollars needed is significant and far exceeds what we have on hand, what we expect to be able to raise. So we continue to see our role as being a pilot, being a demonstrator. Once we've had a few cycles of these types of loans, ideally with community bank partners, we'd expect to be handing them off and getting into new sectors. But really, it's our job is to demonstrate that success and to serve those communities that are not being served by the traditional commercial markets. Excellent. Well, I have not been tracking the questions, so hopefully.
That's okay. That's my job.
Great.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you. That was great, and a lot of really meaty information about what the bank does and how it operates. Let's see. I'm going to spotlight the two of us so we can be side by side. And a couple of questions have come in, all from Josefina. So I'll encourage Josefina or anybody else to keep adding questions. I'm going to ask a few questions before we get to audience Q&A. And I want to get at some of the specificity of what you're doing. So my experience with ANS is in working with the Green Bank has mainly been around the retrofits and the energy savings. So I was pleased to learn so much more about your other three pillars. And I know that's not the focus of tonight's talk, but I do think it's interesting that, you know, most of your work, most of your deals have come from solar. And it seems like maybe it's just because it takes longer to unlock building deals. Is that possible? I mean, can you talk to us a little about what the timeline looks like for actually, how do you retrofit a building? Like, how do you fix an old building? What happens? How long does it take? Who needs to get the money in their hands?
It's a great question. And there's going to be a wide range of answers across building types. I think the affordable housing, the BEPS Accelerator is kind of a great way to sort of focus on that. You know, and I am not an affordable housing expert, so I've learned a lot in this job, but I just wanted to flag that as there's a whole world of how those projects are financed and developed, but they're typically on a 10-year, 20-year cycle funded by tax credits. And so if you're not able to come in when that project is being refinanced for a new tax credit developer, then it's very challenging to see some of the upgrades and the type of things that we would want to see financed from the same source. So that's where, you know, there's a hope that PACE can be used as a separate vehicle to do some of those midstream upgrades for affordable housing. We think CLEAR is another possible avenue for that, to really look and break some of those structural requirements that would put you on a 10-year or 20-year cycle, which could be detrimental from a climate perspective to have to wait that long for something that makes sense. Setting aside that sort of affordable housing model, if you're going to do a retrofit in place, let me back up. I think one of the things about solar that's great and simple is you can see it and you kind of get it, right? It's like, I'm going to put solar on the roof. It's going to generate electricity. There's not a whole lot more of explanation that you have to do. If you really want to have a thoughtful and successful building redesign, then it's a much more complex, complete, you have to look at all of the building systems. You have to look at occupancy. You have to look at insulation and air sealing are sort of the obvious places to start. And so when you go in to pitch that to the building owner, there's not a simple, here's this one thing that we can do that's going to make you money right now, and here's the payback. And instead it's, here's this full building redesign that's probably going to cause you and your tenants to have to make some adjustments. And if you do all of these things, then yes, it's going to be very cost effective in 2 or 3 years, but it sounds like a lot of work. And I think in some cases it is a lot of work. I speaking very personally, we just did a basement renovation, and as part of that, I had wanted to try and install geothermal in our house, and it's now working 8 months later, but there was a whole lot of permitting process. It's a real pain. It's not easy. And so I think all of those things sort of conspire against buildings to be, as effective and as simple as something that you basically just stack on top of the building, right? So it is more challenging. It's a long-winded way of saying there's a lot of different factors, and it makes it hard to sell.
But what about appliance changes? So that's something we've pursued is, I, for example, live in a DC row house that was, as far as I can tell, built with zero kitchen ventilation and a gas stove. And it still has zero kitchen ventilation, but earlier this year, I changed to an induction electric stove, partly because I have little kids and I was learning more about the health risks of operating, a methane burning stove with no ventilation. I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? So dangerous. So I switched, and it did cost me money. It cost me about $2,600, including the electrical work and the install, getting rid of the old thing and the purchase. I documented it on our on our ANS blog, and I'll put the link in. But it also struck me that while there was obviously a cost to actually purchase the stove, it was quite a simple set of tasks. Like I needed the electrician to run the new wire, and if I was in a multi-unit building and the landlord wanted to do that for 8 units at once, for example, they could have had an electrician do the whole thing in a couple of days. And they could have gained a lot of labor savings that I had to, pay much higher rates by getting somebody to come out twice, actually, because he messed it up, put it in 1 foot off the exact right place the first time, had to come back, do it again. So is that kind of sort of smaller but impactful on a health scale, does not require changing out the systems. What are you guys looking at that might bring, really, really scale some of these things down, but get at some pinpoint needs that people can do without disrupting their lives? Is that something that you have in your portfolio?
We don't have it in our portfolio today. And we wouldn't be the front line on that, financing that appliance change. However, one of the ideas that has been proposed to us, which is still in infancy, but the general concept is, if you look at the city and you start to put a pool together where you're saying you're financing the emergency replacement for appliances. So, most of the time when someone buys an appliance, it's because something's broken and they have to replace it. So if, we could support a pool, potentially partnering with, US DOE or others, that then, your more typical consumer appliance lender would be able to say, well, if you choose this option, you're eligible for this financing rate. And then if it is a pretty simple install where it is, you're not seeing that much of a cost difference, then I think our financing price can make a difference to help make that equitable. That's something we're thinking about, but there's a long ways to go between, rolling out that program. But certainly it's something that there's appetite and interest from at the federal level, with the kind of dollars that could really make that scale to where you would need to see to really make those impacts.
So where does gas play in? So we look at I think a lot of the reason for the buildings being such greenhouse gas emitters is because of inefficiency losses, right? That you are burning some sort of fossil fuel, but then it's going out the window or through the wall. So a lot of it is insulating, right, and protecting and sealing that envelope. But it also matters what fuel we burn. So are we? My understanding is that you're looking for opportunities that are the most efficient you can get, and that sometimes you're still financing things that have gas HVAC systems, for example, or appliances in some way. Do you have a plan to stop doing that, or did I mischaracterize? How do we stop burning natural? I don't want to say natural gas anymore. How do we stop burning fossil gas, which leaks methane,
Right.
leaks, at every point in its system, even if it's a little more efficient when you burn it versus burning coal or something?
This is a debate and a discussion that we've had quite a bit with the council and with other advocates to date. And to date, we have not financed a methane project. We have not. I'll say I have not. We have not been willing to put in place a blanket prohibition. And in part because of the cost differential, we have as part of our mission serving broad range of DC residents, particularly when we're looking at low income affordable housing. We don't think that it's fair to effectively exclude some buildings because the residents are unable to pay for the cost differential that you would see in some cases for electrification. We are requiring for any project that we would, eventually theoretically finance a methane replacement or upgrade, we would require that a fully electric alternative be considered and priced out. And we do our best to make sure that, from what we can do on the financing side, that we make that price as competitive as possible. Based on initial numbers that we've seen from our colleagues over at DCSEU who have done some full replacement and retrofits, they are seeing that as more expensive today. But there's no question that's where we're going. The DOEE has a timeline that they put out there for recommending, no future gas installation goes beyond this point. The city's made that commitment. So I think there's no question about over the long term, we're going to be getting away from methane. We have to. Becomes from our perspective an equity issue about how do we implement that in the early years when there's not as much clear dollar support for that significant price differential when you do see that. How do we solve that? I think if Build Back Better passes in its current form, which that's predicting federal legislation is a dangerous game, but there are significant dollars for electrification in Build Back Better, specifically targeted towards those kinds of expenses. Even without that, there's significant dollars for green banks. So there's potential resources there, maybe from the federal government. I've been interested in exploring the concept of in the regulated utility space. We've seen lots of retirements of nuclear facilities, coal facilities, with those costs being rate-based, paid out over very long periods of time at very low interest rates because it's all ratepayer committed, ratepayer backed securitization. In my mind, we have a massive set of infrastructure across the city that I don't mean the pipes, right? I mean exactly what you're talking about. Stoves and HVAC systems and buses, frankly, that we're going to need to figure out how to retire. And that tool has worked for regulated utilities. Why not apply it to the situation and put together a large bond issuance to really look at how do we cover that cost differential? Because I think where you're seeing the cost is equal, I think we're in pretty good shape to provide lower cost financing for electric conversions. But when you're seeing an additional $2,000 for a stove, I mean, that's going to be a hard sell for some. And you shouldn't have to choose that, right? I mean, that's to your point, if it's significantly endangering your children to have those emissions in your house, that shouldn't be a $2,000 choice, right?
Exactly. And part of that cost was simply the cost of replacing any stove, right? So if my gas stove had been dying, then there's some differential there, which is the cost of the replacing the gas stove that doesn't necessarily need to be in there. But it wasn't dying. It worked fine, except that it was combusting methane into my house and scaring me. And one time it nearly exploded in my house. We came home and the house was methane because the dog had turned on the gas stove and had to call the fire department. That's terrifying. And there was a gas explosion near me in the Petworth neighborhood. Actually, there's been several in just the past couple of years. So it's scary stuff. And I think that there's perhaps a non-finance reason to make some of these investments so that we don't price in the health of children and, the safety of neighborhoods from exploding pipes. But it is part of the equation. It's, all right, I want to go to some questions from our audience. I have more questions for me, but I don't want to dominate. So I wonder if Helen or Josefina, if either of you would like to come on live and ask your questions face to face, just like I get to. So I'm going to allow you to talk and encourage you to, actually I'm going to invite you to become a panelist. You don't have to do it. If you don't do it, we'll just ask your questions ourselves. I'll ask your question, but if you'd like to ask some of your questions, please come on and become a panelist. And the same goes for anyone else. You can either raise your hand or pop something in the Q&A. Who's first? You've both gotten your invitations. And it looks like
Yes, thank
Josefina's
you.
here.
Yes, thank you. Like excellent initiative. I didn't know that was a reality. I hear rumors a while ago, but I didn't know that it had, happened. So that's absolutely great. And so I have some curiosity around, the whole dynamic, and it covers, 2 or 3 elements. One has to do with, and I think that you already answered that. Yes, the fact that, if your loans are for regular consumers, if somebody has an energy audit and needs to do some enhancements, can you go and get that loan used to sponsor some of the expenditure? Because if I don't have that financed in good terms, well, I won't help on reduce climate change impacts. And so, so I was thinking, that would be one thing. Another point, and I don't know whether you want to go question by question. I have 3 questions actually. Or you want me to shoot them all and you discover? Just tell me, how do you?
Let's go one by one. So I don't.
Yeah, let's
I
go
don't
one by
lose
one.
track.
Eli, why don't you answer that first question about, like, if you're a homeowner, you've done an energy audit and you want to get financing, how do you do it?
So so we are, I think I mentioned this, but just to be clear, we as the
Right.
bank are not directly lending to excuse me, to consumers. So we
Right.
are looking to work with organizations like Clean Energy Credit Union, but also several of the local community banks and CDFIs would be good places to start. The other obvious resource here in DC is we have the Sustainable Energy Utility. So DCSEU does offer rebates directly to consumers. I don't think they're doing energy audits for homeowners right now, but they have from time to time.
Yeah, I'm thinking on the lines of, I'm just regular being who is interested, has the conscience to do it. And, and I think that is a low-hanging fruit for cities with not a strong industry to be able to manage, the net zero, yes? Because,
yes, absolutely.
And so this is sort of a low-hanging fruit that it is there. And so the idea that you share about having linking with other institutions that work on loan for regular customers to motivate that, I think that is in an incredibly great initiative, because I bet you that in DC, let's say on the affluent neighborhoods, many people would go for it. I tell you, eyes closed, because they had a close financing, and so that's sort of an idea on the table that I thought, come on, you guys, probably can help making it happen, partnering with the right people if it is not sort of your line. Yeah, so that's a fun idea. Can I shoot a second one?
Please.
Yes.
Yes.
On the stormwater dimension, yes, the retention and whatnot, ecologically sound approach when you have the problem of water retention and to be able to work through improve and help the quality of life. It is, and I'm looking at it from the perspective of the city, yes, the city environment. There is this thing about the rain gardens, and it's basically to just facilitate, to create these spaces, to beautify the place, in addition to really become a filter and a way to help regulate the stormwater, which is kind of solutions that not necessarily have the big piping and the whole disruption, because you have to throw a huge pipe going to the Potomac or Anacostia. Is that something that you toy with in your minds, on the possibility of expanding possibilities of that sort?
So that's those are the kinds of projects that the DOEE Stormwater Retention Credit Program is designed to support. The projects that we finance for that, they are things like increased tree plantings. Gary and I actually got to go out and plant some of the trees. Well, I didn't have to do any work because I had the baby with me, so I got to stand around and direct and get my picture taken. But Gary had to do some hard work that day. We those projects are also doing, retention basins, those kinds of things. Not on the single family homeowner scale. DOE does have a program for that. And the name is escaping me right now, but we may be looking at potentially supporting a developer who's doing a lot of that work at the residential scale and at the slightly larger scale. But we're absolutely excited about and are funding stormwater retention projects. And the exciting thing about those, from one of the many exciting things, because they have to be in the MS4 region of the city, they're naturally not in the downtown core. They're not in, upper Northwest.
By the Anacostia or by the,
Exactly,
close down
exactly.
to the, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And now, so is this bank a public or a hydrant? I don't think that I didn't get it, precisely.
I probably should have explained that in the beginning. So we are an independent agency of the DC government. So we are created by DC government. We're funded by DC government. But when it comes to our balance sheet, we have our own separate balance sheet, and we're able to issue bonds. And so we're an independent financial entity.
But the government probably has a very strong interest on making your organization known, because it is through your organization through which they can realize the expectations that they have, yes? And so the question is, how much of the work they do on making it well known, it's like all the DC construction companies, or the well-known construction companies, know that you guys exist and motivate them to start getting into the, the cool, funky sustainability design and, all of these kind of things? Or how this gets, also being known to the residents of DC. I don't live there, I work there, but of course, COVID also is not helping, that we don't know what is happening, beyond the doors of our homes. But my friends and I didn't know, and I haven't heard of this. So I'm wondering how much of the noise the DC government is making on this, because it's an incredibly great initiative. I think that it is really something that has the potential to do, many, many things for climate change. So curious on that.
So, Josefina, I'm going to jump in here. I'm Gary Decker. I'm our external relations partner, and so you're singing my song right now. And so we did start up operations in April of 2020 after the pandemic set in. So it has been challenging at times to get the word out in a way that you normally would. We've done a lot of virtual events. We've just started to come out and do some in-person events too. So we spent a lot of time talking to building owners and operators, talking to industry associations as well, solar developers, and so on, to try to get the word out. One of the challenges there in terms of residents is, as Eli said, that we aren't able to make consumer loans at this time. And so our core audiences and the biggest impact that we can have earliest on is to make sure that developers, building owners and operators know who we are and what we can offer. And so we're gradually amplifying our message to them. And then you're getting a sneak peek today. You saw in the PowerPoint presentation that coming soon, we're going to have partnerships where we can offer financing through our partners, that there will be discounted financing available for solar, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, and charging stations, and what have you, for residents across the district. And as soon as the ink is dry on that partnership, I'm just going to be walking down the street, yelling at everyone I can find to let them know that that's available. But we'll be doing a big marketing push on that front. Because even though we focused on the low-hanging fruit of building owners and operators and developers, everyone like yourself wants to get involved and wants to do something. And this is something that we know we have to offer, is a pathway for residents to do what they can and to spread the word as well. So if you have additional ideas on, once we're ready to direct market to residents, how you would like to hear about it, or how people like you might want to hear about it, I think that'd be great to hear from you.
shoot us your email and I tell you that I will really, yeah, seriously, because the idea is so great that, just absolutely, yes, through this webinar world, I have been in several webinars on the DC government on activities that they have done. I guess like 2 weeks ago, there was a session where everybody who is somebody into the environmental arena from NGOs and not, it was in the place. Now that I know of you guys, you should be there. You should have been there and people should have known of you. So, send me the email and I send you the names of the people and the organizations. And so, because, they will probably help, facilitate a platform for you to get the word out. So
yeah, we do collaborate a lot. As Eli was talking about, the Department of Energy and Environment and the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, we collaborate a lot with them. If we have webinars, we'll invite them and vice versa. We've done webinars with the Montgomery County Green Bank as well, to get the word out, especially since we partner or we share a product. So there's regional offerings. So these are some things that we have done.
Nice.
But if there are things that you think we should be at in the city, then please send them our way. But we have been getting out there and are always willing to find ways to speak to new audiences.
Great. Thank you, and congratulations. As you can see, I'm really excited on the idea because I think that really it is the money also, and putting that front to offer examples. Yes, more developers are going to be coming on, and the new ones that are now are, they can probably be making lots of money. I don't care. They are really facilitators, pioneers. They're opening the path, for this to happen. So yeah, I think that it is a great initiative. Congratulations, guys. Really great job.
Thank you very much, Josefina. Appreciate it. And thank you for all your good questions and for being here tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Josefina. All right, I'm going to turn off your video, Joe. And,
yes, please.
Send you back to
go to the shadows. Yes.
Yeah, to the shadows. And let's see, we have now some other great questions. So I wonder if Deborah, Helen, or Karen would like to come on and ask your questions live. What you can do to show me that you'd like to is press raise hand, and then I'll turn you right on to become a panelist. And if the answer is no, I'll ask your questions for you. But okay, Helen's ready. Let's go. Okay. So I'm promoting her to a panelist. She'll be on in a minute. And Karen and Deborah, if you're interested, please raise your hand and I'll turn you on.
Sorry, can you hear me? Helen Santiago Fink. I'm a climate urbanist by profession and education, and I'm currently manage a smart sustainable cities portfolio in Southeast Asia for the State Department. But I've worked around the DC area for many years, and yeah, I used to work for Enterprise Community Partners. So kudos to you. I think I used to attend some of the meetings in the early days of the DC Bank formation. So I'm glad to see that it's up and running. One of my general questions, you mentioned that there's always a lot of projects in the pipeline, but projects fall through. I'm just curious as to what are those challenges, and be interested to know how we could try to mitigate them early on to be able to allow more successful projects.
It's a great question. So thank you, Helen. The first couple of examples that come to mind, I actually think of as successes, which is a little bit, I always have to adjust my my mental gears on that. But we've had a couple of projects where we were offering competitive rates and we were being used, which is fine, as competition with the commercial lender. And eventually our borrower was able to convince the commercial lender to come down to our rates. In both of those cases, it was somebody that the borrower had worked with previously. So they were just more comfortable moving forward with that. But we were still able to help them out in terms of some competitive pressure there. So that, and that's going to happen in any business arrangement. we've also seen some the gas discussion. You know, we had some projects where, you know, one particular community institution, they wanted methane heat, and we had some questions and wanted to see if there was some way that we could maybe, you know, get them to think about a heat pump conversion. And just that process of sort of requiring them to get that quote and moving forward in possibly a different direction. They weren't comfortable. They wanted to move more quickly, and so they went ahead and did the HVAC replacement. Some of the projects, you know, you see some projects fall out, but you hope and expect that they're going to come back. You know, we have one that's on hold right now, just waiting on PEPCO for interconnection. I expect that one's going to come back. We have a couple others that similarly they're on pause or on hold for reasons completely unrelated to our project. And so we sort of expect when that issue is resolved, they'll come back to us, you know, financial concerns or others. And then, you know, I think like anything in the world these days, you know, the pandemic just remains a giant question mark for businesses. When are folks going to come back to the office? What's the right investment that we're going to make? So I think we're still in a space of a lot of uncertainty, particularly in real estate. So buildings, as we're all talking about, you know, what's the right investment to make given that uncertainty? So I think we see a lot of stops and starts and hesitancy about making some of these larger retrofit investments.
Great, thank you for that. I'm just curious, I might have missed this. Given that a lot of the current real estate is being sort of reconsidered or to some extent reprogrammed, given that the office space and the commercial space in many cases may not be, or maybe actually become obsolete, where, you know, offices are going more towards telework and leaving office spaces. Do you see a huge market in terms of retrofitting these potentially large commercial spaces into ideally things like affordable housing, mixed income housing, mixed use developments? Is that something that there's been conversations around that in terms
There's
of?
definitely been conversations. I think in the same way that the uncertainty, there's not certainty about the conversion being required, right? So we're sort of in this, you know, we're in the gray area right now.
There's no certainty about anything in this new normal. That's
But
just the reality.
Right. But your commercial building owner, your commercial office building owner, you know, they're not quite ready, at least in some cases, to say, you know, it's never going to come back, right? And take the price cut that they would need to see to do that. And we've seen some of those transitions start to happen, but I think, you know, there's also, you know, a strong belief and hope, you know, on the part of the DC government, who has been working in office since June, that folks are going to come back at a more regular pace. You know, as here in DC, we're all very tied to the federal employee schedule. So, you know, whenever the administration decides to start making more formalized plans for how those office spaces are going to be filled and reused again, I think we'll see some movement in that point. That said, in some ways we're interested in supporting, you know, any affordable housing project that wants to be sustainable, whether it's a conversion from an office building or whether it's, you know, greenfield or just simply an update of existing affordable housing. So, you know, from our perspective, we're happy to support anyone who's looking to do green retrofits more broadly.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your work and much success.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, I'm going to move your spotlight. Okay, so Deborah's ready with a hand up. Okay, Deborah, you're coming next. I'm going to promote you to panelist to ask your question. Thank you. Great. I already know Deborah's question. She told me in an email. But honestly, while she's coming on, I will say that Deborah's question is about sort of choices that individual homeowners or the building owners can make. And I have a lot of similar questions myself, so I might add a few after she's done.
Yeah, so a personal question. I have a 100-year-old house and we have natural gas boiler and radiators. And radiators are a great way to heat your house, except that they use fossil gas. But how extensive is that? I'm imagining that a lot of buildings in DC are using radiators, and I've heard that we might be a couple years away from some sort of a heat pump or combination multiple heat pump system that can heat the water in radiators. So instead of people, ripping out their radiators and doing what's pretty expensive to come up with an alternative system, is there a technology coming that would allow people to keep their radiators? And is there a way that the Green Bank or other institutions can push those technologies to get them online sooner?
Great question. And I don't have the gas boiler numbers, but I know that information is out there. I think DOE, as part of the BEPS process, they collected a ton of data, especially on larger buildings. I'm not sure where the numbers would be on the residential side, but it's a widespread problem. I don't think there's any disagreement on that. Speaking personally, I know that where geothermal is possible, I know that geothermal can produce enough heat to run some radiator systems. I can't speak to particular, and I'm certainly not a HVAC contractor, so don't hold me to that. That's not an official Green Bank position. But the conversation I had with the contractor that I was talking to, that was an option. We didn't have radiators, so it didn't really affect us. But and I thought, I haven't heard about air source heat pump to radiant heat systems. So I haven't looked into that. I don't know for certain on that particular source. From a efficiency perspective, we're certainly interested in supporting developers, by developer, contractors who are looking at these kinds of technologies. What we've seen is the developers who are trying to do a net zero house retrofit, if they're trying to do passive house, they're going to be looking at some of those advanced technologies. And so we're happy to support them. We haven't done technology specific financing, although we've talked about it in a couple of cases where there's a technology that's available in other parts of the world, but it would take a significant investment to bring it here. Could we support that? We'd be open to that. There just hasn't been the right fit or need yet, but that's something we'd certainly be happy to support. I would also personally, from living in a row house that did not have radiators previously, we moved last year, but really looking at what you can do on the insulation side. Again, my experience was it was really hard to do because it's a row house, and you don't want to lose any of that interior space to put more insulation on the walls. We actually did some exterior insulation, which is only an energy nerd sort of gets to that level of thinking about how things might be improved. But even if you can't replace your radiator at that point, then you can dramatically reduce the amount of methane you have to consume to keep the heat.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks, Deborah. Karen does not have her hand up. Karen, you're welcome to put your hand up if you want to ask your question live. If not, I'll be thrilled to read it for you. Oh, she's ready. Okay, I'm gonna bring her into panelist. But I will, while Karen comes on in, which takes a minute, I have some other, I guess this is sort of a big picture question, right? Like, we have to do all these buildings, but it's so challenging for individual homeowners, not even to say renters, right? To try to take these steps. We're all doing it on our own. We each have to become experts on energy systems within our own homes. Like, it's kind of a question about how do you fight climate change, right? Should we be doing this, or should you be setting up a microloan system so that, you know, homeowners that want to fund retrofits can put money in with you can put it back out in the most efficient way, and we can gain, you know, more building emission reductions in the city without each of us having to become energy experts in our own homes. Just an idea, like, what's the right way to balance the level of effort somebody might want to put on, you know, contributing to reducing this emission burden?
Well, I mean, in a way, that's what the DC Green Bank is, right? I mean, when you pay your electric bill and your natural gas bill, you know, that some small slice of that is going to the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund, and then that's coming to us and allowing us to take the time and make that investment. It is more challenging, I think, on the expertise question. I mean, again, just my recent experience is pretty fresh, so I'm going to keep falling back on that. You know, we're doing a refinance. The appraiser came out to the house, and he was so excited because he'd never seen geothermal before. And you know, I felt a little bit better about all of the pain that I'd went through at that point, thinking, you know, this is what it's about. Like, he's now seen this, and, you know, maybe he'll tell his friend, and that'll start to be a little more well known. It wasn't the simple conversation with our general contractor and was like, I want to do this. They weren't like, oh yeah, that sounds great, we'd love to help you. You know, it took a few conversations, and I had to really push on that. And it's, to your point, I think we're right. I don't think we succeed if we're asking every homeowner to do that.
Right.
So figuring out a path to make that easier, to really get the contractors on our side, so that they are marketing and it's an easy sell for them. So when they get that emergency replacement call, they actually have an option that's, you know, to the customer, cost effective, can be done in the same period of time, doesn't require weeks of education and scheduling meetings and permitting, right? So viewing it from that ultimate customer lens about what the customer really needs, I think is critical, and something we have to work on.
Right. Because on the other hand, well, we don't want individual homeowners to have to deal with this because it won't be successful. Most of the buildings are homes.
Right.
Like, that is, the majority of the buildings in the city are homes. So how do we, you know, eventually they do need to be got at as well. Right, Karen is ready. I'm going to add you here to the spotlight, Karen, and encourage you and invite you to ask your question. Thank you.
Hello. And this last conversation is something that we've been talking about here quite a bit as well. I'm in Frederick County, Maryland, and we're just starting to kind of research and look into the possibility of establishing a green bank here. But going back to the previous conversation, I personally am also going through a renovation project right now, trying to figure out how to get rid of my natural gas-fired boiler in a single-family house. And finding contractors who will even give you a quote on what your options are and how to do it and how much it's going to cost is extremely difficult. So I think there's lots of work to be done there. And in the climate report that we recently put together, we were also focusing on the need for outreach to building industry associations, realtors, appraisers, all of those things as well. So I'll be kind of paying attention to how you guys progress in DC and look forward to seeing what you come up with and what we can kind of learn from you. So I guess the other question that I had put in the Q&A was around the potential for green bank funding for urban agriculture and other food security programs. For example, one of the things we're talking about here is creating a food hub in the city of Frederick that would allow us to kind of connect farmers and folks who don't have access to fresh food and various other sources of food, you know, all coming together in one place. I know there's grant funding, you know, potentially out there. There may be private investment, but it seems like a green bank may be another option for something like that. And I had noticed on one of your slides it mentioned something about food security, but I'm thinking that may have had to do with a grocery store being added to a food desert. So that's a little bit different.
Right. That's what the reference was. we have fairly broad authority. Food security itself is not something that's called out in the statute. We certainly view supporting food security as an important part, and in that case, bringing access to healthy food as part of inclusive prosperity and helping support that aspect of our mission. So that, we were very excited about that project, which was doing several other things as well, but a sustainable building upgrade that's going to be efficient. It's going to have solar. It's going to be supporting the grocery store. That was a great project that we're hopeful comes through eventually. This is pre-development finance dollars from us. I think we've had, there's a consortium of green banks, the American Green Bank Association. And so we've had several good conversations with the Maryland Clean Energy Center, so you're probably familiar with them. But I know they do some work statewide, as well as the Climate Access Fund, also in Maryland statewide, focused more on low income access for solar. But if we can be helpful, if there's anything in particular we can share, happy to. We've had several conversations with folks thinking about, what would a green bank look like in our community? So certainly happy to do that. The other institution here in DC that I would say might be of interest is the Building Innovations Hub. The sort of ecosystem that DOEE has created. SEU is out there giving rebates. We're doing financing, and the Innovations Hub is the attempt to be a kind of a safe space between government and businesses, where businesses come together, talk about the advanced technologies that they're doing. It's really where the realtors and the engineers and the building owners are coming together to have those conversations about how are we going to meet the BEPs? What are the technologies that are out there? So they're a great resource. They've got a ton of quality information on their website. It's focused more on the commercial side, but worth taking a look.
I'll take a look at that then too.
Thank you. So with that, we are at 8:28, and that means that we're going to end. It's very important to me that we end all our conservation cafes promptly on time, so that anybody who needs to help put their kid to bed, for example, or just take their own shower and turn off for the day, can do so. And I always put myself in that boat. So I want to thank you guys both so much, Eli and Gary, for joining us. You've been given a big task by the city, and the nice thing is there's just so much to do. Everything you take on is an opportunity, and the question is just how to line it up right to be the most efficient and fast with getting those emissions reductions. So please do continue to call on us to support, to provide input, to facilitate any conversations that we can, and we really appreciate you coming and being so open with us. We'll continue to push you not to put any gas in buildings. I think that if it's hard to retrofit, at least it's easy not to put it in any new buildings or any rebuilding buildings. It's really exciting to hear about all the innovations that you guys are doing. So thank you. I have a last question that I want to ask you to close us out on, which is, how do you share across other green banks? The very idea of a green bank is not that old. So how do you get these ideas filtered out and make sure that other places around the country and the world are hearing about the mechanisms you're creating? And if you could close us with that, that would be terrific.
Sure, happy to. A small piece of my background that's relevant here is when I was a junior attorney, my pro bono client was the Coalition for Green Capital, who helped support the creation of the first green bank, the Connecticut Green Bank. So I got to work on the drafting legislation for that, and then the New York Green Bank. That entity, so former client, is now running the association, and we have weekly or biweekly meetings where we cover, what's new, what have you learned, what are you working on. We actually had a call today, and it's always reinvigorating to just hear about the exciting work that's going on elsewhere in the country. A ton of good models out there. I think we've done some innovative things too, which, you know, I feel like I'm happy that we contributed. But that kind of basic Zoom call that I think they actually started right in the pandemic because everybody was just needing some opportunity to connect. But it's kept going because we do see the benefit of sharing those experiences. We've just joined the Green Bank Network, which is more internationally focused. So I don't have as much to report about that, but I expect similar sharing of opportunities, and they have a much more complete and fulsome focus on written materials. You know, they have a section on their member website where they share, here's how you do X, here's how you do Y. And so that's a resource that we're looking to tap to understand better what's happening internationally, and again, hopefully contribute to as well. But we also just read the news.
Read the news, right?
We also, Eliza, have since we're pretty new in our operations, other areas interested in forming green banks have reached out to us. So we've talked to folks in Virginia and Ohio and just across the border in PG County,
Texas,
trying to share information about what it takes to start one up, how ours came to be, how our board is run, and all sorts of different questions. So it's catching fire. And I'll say that the biweekly discussions we have with the Coalition for Green Capital and the American Green Bank Consortium, we're all pushing together to unlock federal funding in the bills that you're seeing to create a national green bank who would pass money on down to folks like us and get it out the door. And that I do think that would really help us to speed up the transition. We'd be able to work on innovative ways to even out the costs between dirty fuels and cleaner alternatives. So we're really excited about that possibility. But as Eli said, we can't count our chickens until they hatch for federal legislation. But there's really a lot happening. And if that national green bank is created, you'll see a green bank in every state and territory in the country pretty rapidly.
Well, thank you. And thank you both so much again for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. I'm going to grab the screen share back and just show everybody our upcoming conservation cafes that we have scheduled for January and February. We hope you'll join us. We've got another one on working on sort of circular cycling of resources through the economy in January with circular economy professional Nick Esposito from Philadelphia. And then in February, we have Richard Trent, who's the new director of the Friends of Anacostia Park, which is the newest Friends group in town. And a really exciting opportunity to connect this incredible jewel along the Anacostia with communities. So please join us on January 20th and February 17th for our next conservation cafes. And thank you again, Eli, and thank you, Gary, and thank you to all of you who have come. I want a special shout out to my present and past DC conservation advocates, Germani and Ari, and to Kathy Benjamin, who has been a volunteer who helped create and sustain the concept of Conservation Cafe back when it was in person and has continued to attend them all virtually. And one day we'll get back to having coffee and baked goodies again when we have these events. So thank you all so much for joining us and have a lovely evening.